Hey, everybody, it's Rick Wilson on the Lincoln Square Network. Welcome back to Behind the Numbers with the Wilsons. I'm joined today by my son, Andrew, brilliant pollster, all around good guy, um, a new father, and all that stuff.
Good
So,
morning.
good morning. Good morning.
I just want to apologize to the people at home. It's been a slow news week, so we don't really have too much to talk about. It's
Right. It's been very quiet this week.
this is
Um,
Behind the
yeah,
Numbers, the show where we talk about polling briefly, and then you guys get a sneak peek at kitchen table conversation.
exactly. So, well, let's start, Andrew, I guess, by let's cover the I want to cover the LA situation, um,
Sure.
and this is a as you said earlier, it's bad for Trump. It's not great for Democrats, but they have a space of opportunity
Right.
here
It's a
to
tightrope.
drive through
Um,
this thing. So let's
Democrats.
talk about what we're seeing in the numbers so far
Yeah.
about LA. We've got some slides too, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So in general, this is perceptions of Trump's immigration policy, and you can see it's rather negative with a lot of these extreme actions he's been taking.
Right. This is
Um,
like the Stephen Miller dream
yeah.
portfolio here.
It's some really awful stuff. Sending U.S. citizens to foreign prisons, I think, stands out to me as
Yeah,
is
that kind of
particularly
pops up.
egregious. Um, Immigration raids at schools, that couldn't be scarier. I seriously couldn't imagine anything worse than that.
Yep.
Um, it's obvious that the policy that he sold on the campaign trail was, we've talked about this before, I'm only going to target criminals, but in reality,
Right.
his DHS, ICE, they are reveling in the abuse of the deportation campaign. They're loving
And
it. I mean,
and
Christy
these
Nome,
numbers, these are a real pathway for Democrats to talk about some of this stuff.
it is. And
Um,
like everything with this immigration situation, it's a tightrope for Democrats. They
right.
have to talk about it in a way where, and we've tried this ground a million times, they have to talk about it in a way where they want controlled immigration, not an open
Hmm.
border, as Trump
Hmm.
would call it. They have to close that vulnerability in a lot of ways. But this kind of extreme deportation campaign clearly is not being perceived well.
Yeah, I don't think that this has I don't think that this has this list of numbers offsets. There is a generally pretty bad upside down nature for the Democrats on the subject of immigration, right? And we can argue why that happens. I think it's by 25 years or 30 years of Fox News, but I can argue that round or flat, as
Right.
Stewart says. Um, but these numbers give you a narrative pathway to talk about this that isn't just because, and I don't know what are we seeing in the numbers with the idea of I mean, we didn't really get to that as much in that deck of the troops on the streets.
Well, in general, people disapprove, and we should probably break this down, right? So
Yeah.
the approval number, I believe, and we have not necessarily broken this out,
Mhm.
but that is the MAGA base number right there, plus or
Yeah. Oh, it
minus
is.
a
It
few
is. I
points.
think that's exactly right.
Um, the only people who really like this idea of having troops on the streets are the sort of authoritarian-minded MAGAs that are out there who want to see regular people abused by the military on the street,
Mhm.
which is wrong.
Mhm.
And of course, there's broad disapproval for this, and a lot of people aren't sure. I think that's because they haven't necessarily given the time to think about what it means to deploy the military to enforce the law. It's really a step in a dark direction, and I think you know
It's
if you see the military,
unconstitutional and illegal, but who's.
right, right. Um, and I also think it's relatively easy to separate LA from your small town in Florida, Georgia.
Yeah. Well, the protests themselves are a little closer, but not. And again, I think this is partly because of the curated reality problem.
Sure.
What are most Americans seeing on the news? If it bleeds, it leads. They're seeing the cars on fire,
Right.
the graffiti, the rock throwing, the tear gas stuff.
I mean, we saw this in 2020, right? Like
Yep.
the the protests overall were not viewed positively, although people broadly are not in favor of police uh, murdering people on the street. But what the problem that we have with the media is that it will always amplify anything that's violent, scary,
Sure.
and of course these things happen late at night. They aren't involving, it's hundreds
Yeah.
of people as opposed to thousands of people.
The assholes spray painting and looting and shit at 10:30 at night are not the suburban moms
No.
protesting
And
because
and
they're
I think it's
yeah.
important to make this point. This weekend, I know a lot of people are going to go out and be on the street protesting and demonstrating. What hurts Trump more is peaceful protest.
Oh God, yeah. Oh
Violence
God, yeah.
does not. Violence it works against our cause.
I made this analogy yesterday. This is a long and well understood thing. But in this phase of this kind of conflict, the moral high ground, whether when your civil rights leaders marching over the Edmund Pettus Bridge being attacked by Bull Connor with dogs and fire hoses and batons, who wins that battle visually, folks? Every time, the people who are the peaceful protesters. And the civil rights movement was at the early growth curve of saturated television,
Right.
and so people saw it. And who do you think they stand with emotionally in their heart and their gut? So the people getting beat up.
Right.
And you're going to see, I think, Andrew, we're going to see provocation this weekend.
I imagine so.
I think the Proud Boys are going to be out, and I think you got this sheriff down in Brevard County who says he's going to kill people.
He's going to shoot people.
He said graveyard dead. The sheriff of
Hmm.
Brevard County, Florida. Guys, in some ways, you want your peaceful protest to be met with the worst behavior on the side of the cops. It will break off a lot more suburban people
Right.
who are less politically engaged, unlike nerds like us every day.
Right.
Right?
And
I mean, I think that, right, Andrew? I mean,
Trump's big gamble here and what he's staked on deploying the National Guard and the Marines is his legitimacy.
Mhm.
And should the enforcement turn violent against protesters, all that the legitimacy of this whole deportation campaign sort of falls out from under him.
Right.
And it's a major risk for him because in reality he's quite weak.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Folks have not been following. If folks have not been following the decline of Trump's numbers, it's real, y'all.
Very
We
real.
talked about it on one of the last shows. Hang on, next. There we go.
That's the one.
Now, Andrew, explain why this is a composite chart and give them.
So this is a composite from G. Elliott Morris. What he's done is taken numbers from several different polls and made this composite poll of Trump's approval on these various issues. So we can see that he's under on everything. Overall, under by almost 8.5 points. Under on the most important things like inflation, the economy, and even down on immigration, which is for Trump a very bad sign. That is his strongest issue since 2015. That's always been his
100%
strongest point. And when he dips below that, it is that he is in dangerous territory and risking, majorities in the House and Senate for the Republicans.
So I want to talk more about that 1 second. Back in 2015, I remember sitting in a focus group in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a guy who had a job in a textile factory, he said, my job was taken. It was basically the South Park thing. They took our jobs.
Right.
Completely said, oh, it's Mexicans taking our jobs. It's immigrants taking our jobs. They come here and they take our jobs. And the moderator, I'm behind the glass because I'm not good I'm not good on the front side of the glass. The moderator asked the guy, he said, well, wait a minute, your factory closed because it was bought out by a hedge fund. So who took your job? Oh, no, that's because the Mexicans have another factory somewhere. Oh, do they? And they linked Trump with an immediate return to manufacturing jobs by throwing out all the Mexicans in 2015. But it's evolved, and I think for them in a way that is better for them on social media, worse for them in the reality world, where now it's about the danger of all these immigrants. They're all eating the dogs and cats. They're all criminals. They're all Tren de Agua. They're all MS-13. And when even Trump yesterday had to come out and start walking back. Did you watch that clip?
I saw it. It was sort of astonishing. I imagine there is something very scary for him behind the scenes that has motivated this sort of
I think
thinking
Tony.
direction.
I think Tony the pollster came in and said, "Champ, this ain't working."
Right.
Rounding up Flora, the housekeeper, or Carlos, the gardener, or the guy who changes your tires down at the Jiffy Lube, or the guy who's picking stoop labor picking cotton somewhere.
I was watching the California Attorney General right when the protests were really getting going, and he made the point. How many MS-13 members do you think are waiting at the Home Depot to get a job?
Right.
How many
Right.
MS-13 members do you think are cleaning hotel rooms for 14 hours a day? It doesn't add up.
How many of them are at the church that the DHS was snatching people in Riverside the other day? I mean, it really is this curated reality that they've built on Fox and Facebook and Twitter,
Right.
where every single one of them is a rabid animal.
And it
Not
it,
like
it it evolved from we hate immigrants to own the libs
Yep.
to real violent intent on the part of these MAGAs. I think in the beginning it was less about the immigrants and more about the fact that Democrats were the ones sort of responsible for the immigration situation. Now now the animus has really been focused on the people who have come here looking for work.
That's interesting, and I think that may be why it's starting to become human for people.
Right.
I mean, you watch those clips of the one of the clips a couple days ago, of a Hispanic woman who's being snatched by the police, and she's screaming, "My baby's in the car, my children are in the car, please don't leave my children in the car." You're just like, that's a much more real scenario what's happening with these people that are being snatched than the fantasy of, oh,
Right.
they're all MS-13 and George Soros is handing out AK-47s at the riots.
Right. I think there's actually a really interesting opportunity for us and for sort of the anti-Trump conservative movement to start talking about DHS, because in my view, DHS is the most perverse manifestation of big government that currently exists.
Sure. You know what? It's funny. I warned somebody in the Bush administration when they were forming DHS right after 9/11. I said, y'all better keep this thing in a narrow lane, because this is an internal security service.
It is.
We've
And
never had one in this country before. We never have.
FBI should take on the counterterror role.
Exactly.
We should not have such a massive police bureaucracy beyond the FBI in our government.
I think that's a good point, Andrew. There's a constituency, I think, out there for a libertarian small government argument that this will metastasize.
It is. It has. I think we've already reached that point. I mean,
Right.
we were very vulnerable after 9/11, and
Mhm.
we made a huge number of mistakes, of
Sure.
course. And DHS is one of the big ones. And
Mhm.
it is actively attacking your privacy, and it is abusing people on the street. So
I can tell you on the privacy front, I talked to somebody in DC yesterday who is with an association who told me they had polled the Thiel spyware thing. Peter Thiel, folks, one of the big libertarian weirdo donors to Trump, and a sort of a secret. He's like the dangerous version of Elon, not
Right.
as public, much more dangerous. Palantir, they had polled the Palantir idea, and he said it's upside. Their pollster, I talked to her too. He said it's upside down by 70 points. 18% approve.
I mean, it's no surprise. The American people love their privacy, and they ought to.
Yeah.
And when big government is the one invading our privacy, it's very scary. And
Yeah.
Meta invades your privacy every day, but they're selling you ads.
Right.
When the government
It's less
is
pernicious than
right,
Peter Thiel wanting to know what kind of porn you look at.
when the government's scooping up all your data, that's something you need to worry about.
Yeah, that And I think there is, once again, there's a right side of the equation argument to be made to people. Hey, do you really want a bureaucrat in Washington to know how much ammunition you buy? Do you want a bureaucrat in Washington to know what kind of guns you own? What kind of gun safe you have in your house? I think there's a way to get to that. We ought to talk more about that as we
Yeah.
go forward, because I think there's a real angle there that has been unappreciated. So you mentioned earlier we're getting into the zone where Trump's numbers are going to impinge more strongly on House races in particular and possibly Senate
Sure.
races. But I want to ask you, obviously it's too early. We haven't seen any polling on it yet. What do you think about that visual of a U.S. senator being bum rushed and physically attacked by Noam's guards yesterday? Um, uh, do we think that there's going to be a polling impact when we're starting to see members of Congress arrested and beaten and assaulted by the executive branch?
I think they're like every issue, it's going to be one of those things that creates a small wedge and you can peel off a certain number of people from it.
Hmm.
But the online echo chamber and false reality that MAGA has online is reveling in the beating of
Oh, they loved it.
video.
Yeah,
They love it. And you read through the comments on those videos, they wanted
they
worse.
should have shot him.
They should have shot him. They should have beat his ass, whatever. Of course. But it will give us and Democrats an opportunity to wedge off another small portion of those suburban voters who,
I think that's right.
want to see stability and normalcy in government and don't want to see their senator beaten, wrestled, or dragged out of a
Yeah,
room.
crazy. The crazy level of that thing was way up there, and I
Right.
and I do think that there's a degree to which that's not baked in the cake quite yet.
Right.
And the
It's what it's about is taking all these incidents as a whole and wedging off point 0.5 or even smaller percentages with
right.
just one incident. You can leverage something like this to peel off a small number of people, but these things keep happening. So we'll have more and more opportunities for it.
So, in a lot of the research you've done, you've looked a lot at these sort of authoritarian personality types, but they are not. They're already in Trump's camp.
Sure.
He's not
Many
pulling
of
any
them.
new voters in by the whole bully routine.
No, no, certainly not. And the they do like these things that he's doing. They like the Marine deployment. They like the roughing up senators,
Yeah,
but the constituency is not growing necessarily.
right.
Although Trump is a huge influence on young men, and we can talk about that more. And there's still very influenceable uh,
That
group in
that
this
is an
country.
area that a friend of mine is collating a bunch of the social media posts by these young Marines from 29 Palms, and he's like, some of this shit is not pretty.
No,
And command authority is not being exercised over these guys to tell them to stop saying shit that is stupid. Um, look, we sadly have had a generation, a generation, excuse me, a generation of young men who have been very deeply influenced by the manosphere, by
sure,
the alienation of young guys, by Trump himself, and a lot of them serve in the military,
right.
which should raise a more than a couple of red flags out there, in my mind, just because I think that there's just I think it's a really dangerous moment we're in because God love you, Democrats, but man, you do not know how to read men. Don't spend
Yeah,
$20 million on it. It doesn't take the $20 million. Speak plain English. Think about who they are. Don't accuse all of them of being rapists, misogynists, blah 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 blah. Try not at least,
try not.
and you'll find it. People 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 will run to somebody who says you're not a villain. You're
Right.
okay.
And I think the other quarter of this is, once again, Democrats need to be talking to young men who feel like they're economically isolated. You know, we can
Yep.
make you richer. We can make you have it. You can have a job. Your life doesn't have to be shitty.
It's like you told me last year. You're like, watch this crypto thing because young men who feel economically. You told me this exact conversation. I remember it clearly. You said they feel economically stressed, and when he talks about crypto, they think that's my way out.
Get rich quick scheme.
Yep,
And
that's my
and
way out.
it's extremely tempting. And it's been, tempting since the dawn of time.
Right.
And that's if you are economically and socially isolated, and cryptocurrency seems like a way to become rich and famous quickly,
Hmm.
you might pursue it to the ends of the earth
Yeah.
and or to bankruptcy. Um,
Yeah. Well, the meme stocks are not a good investment, people. So Andrew, one of the things I wanted to talk about also, um, lost in the shuffle of the war on LA is the big beautiful bill,
sure.
which was showing some cracks during the departure of Elon, is still not super popular out there in the world.
No.
Tell us where the big beautiful bill stands and talk to us about the vulnerabilities you think it still has.
So this is Quinnipiac from this week.
Hmm.
You can see it has a total of 53% opposition, which I think is pretty significant. A lot of people don't know or didn't answer. But that
Damn
said,
near 2 to 1.
it is. And even 10% of Republicans opposing
Hmm.
the bill. And this is the thing, you get the Trump effect on his actions on the national stage, but it doesn't translate into Congress.
Right.
You see that 10% there, and that's pretty significant. And
If I
it,
was in it, if I was any of those congressmen a Biden district, those Republican
I'd
congressmen
be
in a
very
Biden district,
scared.
I'd be looking at that independent column where only 20% supported and 57%, the same as the national number, disapprove.
Right.
And on the don't know side, the old rule about the fish never smells better on the third day. I think that applies here. So
Yeah. And then,
even men overall don't support it. That's
right. We framed a lot of this LA protest and deployment
Mhm.
as a distraction from the big beautiful bill and Trump's failing numbers, and that is
Right.
part of the story here. Um, I I think that Republicans in Congress are ready and willing to talk about LA and support Trump in LA, and
Right.
they want it to be all about
They'd love to
protesting.
change the subject.
Right. They do not want to discuss the big beautiful bill because it's clearly toxic.
Woo. And the most toxic element of it, I still believe, is Medicaid, Medicare.
Yes.
It's a steaming lump of radioactive dog shit
Right.
uh, in the middle of
Think
this
we
thing.
have
I
we
think
have
we have
some
another.
other data from Quinnipiac on
Where's
Medicaid.
that other slide? Eh, Nope. Y'all, we're just a small mom and pop network. We're growing fast. But long story short, the Medicare Medicaid thing is a real bleeder. And there we
Right.
go.
So this is Quinnipiac from this week as well. You ask people what should happen with Medicaid, and you can see only about 10% of people say it should go down. And I imagine if this was longitudinal, you would have this, over time. I'm sure this would probably stay relatively similar. People don't want it to change, or they want more benefits. And when they,
Amazing.
lose material benefits that are coming from the government, they're going to be pissed off.
There's an old story from before your time, well, actually, yes, before you were born. Um, there was a Democratic member named Dan Rostenkowski
Hmm.
way back in the early 90s. And Dan Rostenkowski poked his finger into should we cut benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And there was a scene where people like surrounded the guy's car and they're beating on the hood. They were furious about it. And it was so unusual at the time
Right.
because it was one clip that aired on the news and it wasn't like today.
Right.
You couldn't see a million stories of people who are going to get screwed if you cut Medicaid. And I keep saying this, the thing people don't realize, I don't think anybody's polled this. I know we haven't. But when Medicaid gets cut, millions of Americans who are in nursing homes right now are moving home. They're moving back in with their kids. So get ready to be a full-time caregiver. I can't imagine that's going to pop really well in most sort of survey research.
You mean with the millennial families who don't own their home
Yeah.
or are
Mhm.
still renting?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna
It's
be
going to be
great.
great. I told my parents the other day, I'm like, if that happens, first off, they're not in a nursing home. They will never go in a nursing home because they're just stubborn old farts. Um, my parents are 82 and 81 years old, folks, and they're still driving around the country in their gigantic RV.
It's the
Who knew?
life.
Um, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah,
But the thing is the size of an aircraft carrier, by the way.
it's sweet.
It's sweet. It's a sweet RV. Um, but I joked with my mom. I'm like, if y'all ever need to go somewhere, I'm gonna put a shipping container out back in the swamp, and that's where y'all are gonna live. So
Prefab homes. You can do that in Florida now.
yeah. Well, it's look. I think LA is that story is now the LA part of the story is starting to decline.
Right.
I'm hearing from the White House, they think they're getting a lot out of this. They're going to try to do a Seattle version and a Philly version and a Chicago version and a New York version. Weird how they're only going to blue states. I'm shocked and amazed by this.
I was saying this. I was talking to somebody the other day, and Trump really has the petty king mindset.
Oh
He
yeah.
wants to quash the rival power centers.
Yep.
Of course, it starts with LA, the most distant from Washington, the most autonomous, or practically a city state.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
Trump wants to choke off any of that autonomy, and that's his mindset. He doesn't want any other part of the country to have more power than his White House.
Right. And for all those guys that used to carry the pocket constitutions around all the time, oddly enough, hyper progressive blue state California has made the best argument for the 10th Amendment and states' rights that we've seen in decades. It's astounding.
Well, it's going to be an interesting weekend. I'm apprehensive, to say the least.
I think everybody needs to be careful, be peaceful, record everything.
Yes.
Record everything. Don't let that narrative machine on the right, folks, trick you, because they will curate reality. What they do in the Padilla footage in Fox, they edited the footage so it looked like he didn't say his name and was quote unquote lunging at her. It's bullshit. We've all seen the tape. But this weekend, be careful, stand up, be loud, pray for rain in Washington, which is looking more likely by the minute. They built a 7-story reviewing stand for that motherfucker.
Well, what is the price tag for this?
It's about $150 million from what I'm told. So you could take the black mold out of military barracks for that much money, but instead we're going to have a parade, a missile parade for Viagra Donnie. So
I was thinking about this. The streets of DC are not designed to have
they are not.
tanks roll over them.
No, they are not.
And not that I want to see the military embarrassed, but this is a big show, and any hiccup is going to be a major embarrassment for Trump.
Yeah, and the infrastructure in DC, and I remember this from helping plan the Desert Storm Victory Parade, which by the way is how you do a military parade. You did it to honor the troops and their families.
Right.
It wasn't George H.W. Bush saying "Love me," but we had to be very careful where we took armored vehicles in DC.
Right.
Like some of those streets are just not the
equipped.
infrastructure ain't there.
No.
Well, so Andrew, one more thing before we wrap it up. What are you watching as we come out of this LA phase for the next wave of polling numbers? What are you going to be looking for?
I think we will see what this weekend produces for us, and if there's violence, I think the numbers can change significantly one way or the other. We may see that the disapproval of the enforcement flips or becomes much more strong,
right?
Or we could see that the disapproval of the protest becomes much more strong. I wonder if people are thinking about 2020. This is a big problem we had in 24 was reminding people what it was like when Trump was president, and this is what it's like. There's urban unrest when Trump is president. People are angry. There's violence on the street when Trump is president, and for all we put this on, the animus is on the protesters, right? But the reality is that ICE is responsible for these protests.
Yeah.
ICE's behavior.
They're creating this crisis.
Right. It is completely manufactured. I also think I think we should watch Trump's reaction to what's happening in Iran.
Once again, we're strong. We're so strong now that everyone respects us, except they don't even bother to tell us.
Netanyahu is trying to drag us in. He wants us to take sides against the Gulf monarchies because they wanted peace, and Trump's going to have to make a big choice here, whether or not we get involved, and that's a very scary scenario. But he promised no new wars, and of course, we do not have peace in the Middle East because the Abraham Accords was a total farce.
Yep.
So we'll see.
But we're also watching oil prices spike up on my dashboard on the other computer. I'm watching oil prices go. Boop, 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 boop. So, good luck at the pump, everybody.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, Andrew, we've done our what's the fourth show now?
Well, we missed last week because I had a sinus infection, so this will be our third.
It's our third show. Okay. Well, folks, y'all seem to like it, so we're going to keep doing it. And send your questions in. And as Sam mentioned on the Chiron, we will start having a chat feature here at some point in the immediate, and we'll try to take some questions on the air in future shows.
Cool.
All right, Andrew, thank you as always. I will talk at you later.
Cool. All right.